Good morning everyone, Sourshire here, and welcome to a bit of a different video. Today we're taking an in-depth look at Soulcalibur's Nightmare from a design perspective, what works about him and why, and what doesn't work and why. This video is inspired by a YouTuber called TBSkyin, who will be linked in the description down below. He does basically the same thing I'm going to do in this video, but way better. I would highly recommend his channel. He mostly talks about League of Legends, which is a game that I am not even interested in, but I still love his videos. That's how much I think that his analysis is worth watching. So without any further ado, let's talk about Nightmare. The reason that I chose Nightmare for the first episode of this series is that Nightmare is probably my favorite design in all of Soulcalibur. And I think the main reason for this is that he subverts a lot of villainous tropes while still being very clearly evil. What do I mean by this? Well, I think the most obvious starting point is his color. Nightmare is blue. I know, it's the in-depth analysis that you came for. Nightmare is blue, everyone! A shocking revelation. But Nightmare being blue is important to his design. He's named the Azure Knight after all. But what makes his being blue so special? Well, he's not wearing black. Nightmare is a very obvious Dark Lord or Dark Knight archetype in a lot of ways. He's a giant, terrifying warrior in spiky armor who eats souls. But when you look at these types of villains in pop culture, they're usually in black armor with a lot of fire coming out of them. Maybe they'll be in a very dark blue, but never in this vibrant blue that Nightmare is. And Nightmare also has bright gold accents. Blue and gold is a pretty common color scheme, but not for villains, especially not for fantasy villains. Blue and gold are heroic colors. Look at the Alliance from Warcraft, for example. And it's not just his colors that are traditionally heroic looking. Take a closer look at the details in his armor. It's ornate, it's intricate, it has a lot of soft edges. For a lack of a better word, it's beautiful. It definitely wasn't made by an orc. Evil characters are usually characterized by sharp edges and rough, solid patterns. Dark Lords and Dark Knights aren't supposed to be pretty or soft or gentle in any way, at least when they're in their armor. And there's one more pretty, soft, gentle thing associated with Nightmare: unicorns. And no, that's not just a joke about the spike on his head. People have made jokes ever since they added that spike on his helmet about Nightmare being a unicorn, but Namco has fully embraced it for this newest game. Look in the background of his official art, or at his super move. He is heavily associated with unicorns in this game, and just go on Google and look for unicorns. You're not going to find any images that scream, "I want to devour your soul," except maybe this one. This one's kind of terrifying. So it's all fine and good to say that Nightmare subverts all of these tropes, but what is the reason behind it? Why has Namco included these traditionally heroic elements in Nightmare's design? There's two major reasons. The first is that Nightmare wasn't always evil, or rather, he wasn't always Nightmare. For anyone unfamiliar with the lore of Soulcalibur, Nightmare was originally a human knight named Siegfried. And Siegfried is a good guy. He is the protagonist of most of the games, and he was corrupted by the evil sword Soul Edge to turn into Nightmare. I think that the beautiful elements of Nightmare's design are a reminder of Siegfried, a reminder that even though he has been corrupted by Soul Edge, he's still a knight in shining armor, literally. The second reason I believe Namco has done this has nothing to do with the lore. Simply, being blue and having these pretty elements sets Nightmare apart. I said earlier that he fits into the Dark Lord or Black Knight archetype, which is very common throughout fantasy. But looking at other examples of this archetype, they all wear armor that is very similar to one another, In this image, I have the Lich King from Warcraft, Mordekaiser from League of Legends, and Ares from Injustice. There's nothing wrong with any of these designs, but if you were to take all of their armor off and put it onto each other, it wouldn't make a huge difference. There's not a lot of details that say anything specific about the individuality of these characters. The point is, if you were to throw Nightmare amidst all of these other Black Knight archetypes, you would notice him. He's going to look different than the others because he is bright and he is decorative, which a lot of these other characters aren't. Again, I mean no insult to those characters, simply that Nightmare breaks free from so many of the molds that have been set by those characters and characters like them, and really by Sauron, because I think he started all of this because Lord of the Rings is the father of fantasy and everyone wants their Sauron, but I digress. Now this leads to another important question, which is, if Nightmare has all of these traditionally heroic designs and stands out from other characters in his archetype, what makes him look evil? I think that this is an easier question to answer because both of them are very out in the open. He has glowing red eyes, which is probably the oldest and most common and easiest way to show that a character is evil, is giving them glowing red eyes, but also that big mutated arm of his. Nightmare's arm is an incredible example of visual storytelling that you probably won't notice unless you're a long-term fan of the series. Right now, I'm showing some gameplay of Siegfried when he is not Nightmare, and you'll notice a lot of similarities between his fighting style and Nightmare's, but there is an important difference. Siegfried is right-handed. Nightmare is left-handed because his right arm was mutated from picking up Soul Edge. This goes to show just how crippling it is to use Soul Edge. It rendered Siegfried's entire dominant arm useless, aside from doing some vague claw-like motions. He had to change a major aspect of himself just to accommodate for this cursed sword. I said earlier in the video I would discuss what doesn't work with Nightmare's design, but there's not a lot there. There is something I can nitpick, which is the horn in the middle of his helmet, because that would be totally impractical in a real fight. Someone could easily grab onto that and yank his head down, gaining control over most of his motion. As I said, this is just a small nitpick because Soulcalibur is an over-the-top fantasy game, and it shouldn't be expected that any of the armor is going to be practical from a realistic perspective. What's more important is that the armor portrays what Namco wants it to about the character, which it absolutely does. Nightmare is an excellent design through and through, and he shows how a clear archetype can be portrayed without falling upon all of the tropes that have become common within fiction. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I would really love some feedback on it because I've never done this sort of thing before, and if there's any other characters you would like to see me do a similar video on, especially if they're from Soulcalibur, please let me know, and until next time, I bid thee farewell.